Will I fly solo today? Three conditions must be true for this to happen. First, I have to perform well on the morning flight. While perfection is not the goal at this point, safety and consistency are. Second, the weather for the second, possibly solo flight has to be good enough. And third, a qualified instructor, perhaps Victor or Davide, will have to clear me for solo. Today is potentially the day I go on my first solo flight. For this to happen, my hour 20 flight has to be good. So good in fact that Greg would be relaxing in the right seat, not doing anything other than looking out the window, feeling safe, that my decisions are good and my handling of the plane competent enough. While Greg is not yet qualified to endorse me for the solo, he will have this qualification very soon. He is the one to refer me to one of the other school instructors who can endorse me. Before I write about hour 20, let me explain what the first solo flight is all about. The first solo flight marks a significant student pilot training milestone. This is the first time that student flies an aircraft without an instructor on board. The process involves a combination of ground training, flight training, and regulatory requirements. In Australia, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, or CASA, oversees the process of a student pilot's first solo flight. This milestone involves strict adherence to CASA's regulations and standards. Under CASA's guidelines, the first solo flight in Australia is a structured and regulated process emphasizing safety, compliance, and the foundational skills necessary for continued pilot training. It's a critical step towards obtaining a pilot license in Australia. Here are the requirements for a student to be approved for his or her first solo flight. Ground instruction. This includes learning about Australian aviation law, aircraft systems, basic meteorology, and flight principles relevant to the aircraft used. Flight training. Focus on practical skills for flying, including handling the aircraft, navigation, and understanding of the local flying environment. Medical certificate. A Class 2 medical certificate from a designated aviation medical examiner is essential. Aviation Reference Number, ARN. Students must obtain an ARN from CASA, serving as a unique identifier. The Aviation English Language Proficiency, or ELP. This test assesses the student's verbal proficiency in English and aviation terminology. I completed all of the above, but still needed the endorsement of a qualified flight instructor. Now, what happens in the first solo? Victor, one of the full-time instructors at AltaCup who would endorse me for the solo flight, explained the process. He would start the flight like any other lesson. Check the aircraft on the ground, taxi, complete the checklists, communicate with ATC, with the difference that we'd let them know that this flight was special, and then take off. I demonstrate my skills in normal, flapless, and glide approaches in the first few circuits. If I had done all that well, I'd do a landing, drop Victor off at the runner bay at taxiway Delta, and then I would taxi back to holding point Alpha to take off again. I would then radio tower to let them know that I was ready for a single solo circuit. The tower would clear me for takeoff and keep other planes out of my way. I'd take off, complete the circuit, and land. Then I'd pick up Victor from the runner bay and taxi back to the hangar. That's it, mission accomplished. That would be my first solo. Of course, things can go sideways and you never really know what exactly to expect. For example, there could be a radio failure while I was on my solo circuit, and Victor explained what I should do in such case. At the beginning of the startup checklist is the passenger briefing. I've drafted mine based on what Greg told me about it and on pieces that I've collected from books and online resources. And here's my draft. And remember, this is work in progress.
To all passengers, please ensure that your seat belts are fastened at all times, especially during takeoff and landing, and definitely when your captain asks you to do so. To fasten, you can demonstrate, you can insert the metal piece into the buckle and ensure the pull back to make sure it's locked in. There are two doors in this aircraft and actually the front seats, and you can see that you can open them up using pulling up this lever and then pushing the door out to get it to open. Now, very important, when I'm communicating with ATC, you'll be able to hear it, but refrain from talking. Just be quiet until communication is finished. I'll let you know when you can actually talk. If you feel uncomfortable at any time, just let me know so I can help you out and expedite the landing, or perhaps help you out. And there's no smoking at all times on this aircraft.
Another item in the run-up checklist is the takeoff safety briefing. In general aviation, the takeoff safety briefing is designed to prepare the pilot and passengers for the critical phase of taking off. It addresses potential emergencies and outlines the procedures to be followed to ensure safety. This briefing is crucial for ensuring that everyone on board is aware of their roles, the procedures to follow in emergencies, and how to use the aircraft safety features, thereby enhancing overall safety during the takeoff phase of the flight. And here is my safety briefing.
Here's a safety briefing. At takeoff, I'm going to check for 250 RPM, static RPM, as soon as I put in the throttle to maximum. If I don't attain that RPMs, or if there is a spike in the oil temperature or pressure or anything else is in the red, if the airspeed indicator is not alive, if I'm unable to get to rotation speed, which is 60 knots by halfway through the runway, or if there's any noises that are coming from either the cabin or the engine, I will abort takeoff. I will put power to idle, slow down the plane and exit the runway. If the engine fails on the runway, I will close the throttle, apply full and even braking, and slow the aircraft down. If possible, I'll exit the runway. If the engine fails after takeoff with runway remaining, I'll close the throttle, lower the nose, and reland the aircraft on the remaining runway while maintaining airspeed. If the engine fails after takeoff without runway remaining, I will lower the nose to attain 68 knots glide speed, and I will look for a suitable landing strip or landing location within 13 degrees of the nose. I will not turn back unless I'm above 1,000 feet, which will be 1,300 feet here at Camden, and I have to be established in the downwind leg to make it back to the runway. And that concludes the safety briefing.
The safety briefing is followed by the departure briefing. The departure briefing in general aviation is a comprehensive review conducted by the pilot before initiating the takeoff. This briefing encompasses flight plan specifics, airport details, expected weather conditions, and potential emergencies scenarios during the departure phase. And here is my departure briefing.
Next, we've got the departure briefing. So we haven't got clearance for departure yet. We were waiting for the equipment to get off the runway, but eventually we'll probably get clearance to depart off runway 06. We're going to do left-hand circuits today. The circuit altitude is 1,300 feet. We'll maintain that altitude on downwind. Rotate speed is 60 knots for this plane. There's no problems that we know about on the runway. Conditions are good. 3 knots variable winds. I'll be looking out for that.
Motion Bravo, wind variable 5 knots, QNH 1012.
Oh, alright. So we now have Bravo, 5 knots. And I think he said it's variable still.
Yep.
So variable 5 knots.
The QNH 1012.
And QNH 1012. Got it. So this is Bravo. So let's fix that before I forget. 1012. Yeah, each one of those knots is 2. Okay, so we've got 1012, information Bravo. I don't see any other planes in the circuit. That might change later, but at this time it seems like we are the only plane flying in the circuit. As always, we are going to maintain a lookout, both out the window and on the radio. And this concludes the takeoff departure briefing.
The weather today was excellent. Variable winds at just 3 knots was as good as it gets. During this lesson, I completed the 3 types of approaches as discussed in the briefing. The last approach and landing was glide, simulating an engine failure. I did a couple of glide approaches and 2 flapless approaches. The rest were normal. Overall, today's flight was my best ever. I don't mean it was flawless, but simply the best I had done. Unlike the usual bumpy ones, I had a couple of nice and smooth touchdowns. Control of altitude and airspeed was much better and much closer to the expected tolerances.
70 knots.
Keep it on that center line.
Yeah. Throttle. Pulling up. Yeah. Not very good.
Hour 20 was my best flight lesson ever. Greg's opinion was that I was ready for my first solo. He looked up for an available qualified instructor to check me and clear me in the midday flight that I had already booked. Victor was available, though I had to wait for around 30 minutes because he had another flight scheduled. Greg began with the paperwork and I waited for Victor. Fast forward about an hour and Victor is back. We completed the paperwork and walked to Julia Bravo Charlie. The plane had plenty of fuel after the morning flight, but we checked the fuel quantity anyway. Victor did the ground inspection while I was setting up the cameras. And then it happened. The first few tiny drops of rain and a sudden increase of wind were the ominous sign that a change of plan was about to happen. Victor called Camden ground on the radio to learn that 15-knot crosswind had been registered. The Bureau of Meteorology's radar showed a patch of sky with heavy clouds moving east. The edge of these clouds was now passing above us, causing the high winds and bringing some rain. The wind was above the crosswind limit for a solo flight, which is 8 knots. However, the rain was also an issue because it made the runway slippery and affected the landing distance required. So after all of the preparation and the paperwork and the waiting, my first solo would not happen today. I didn't really feel any disappointment. By now I'm very used to weather being the boss of much of my activities when it comes to flying. Of course, for me, flying is for fun and enjoyment. I have very little tolerance for silly risks. So when something is not right, the flight will not happen. So we secured the plane and walked back to the office. I'm booked with Victor for next week's morning flight when conditions are almost always better. If you liked this video, make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel right now. Just click on the subscribe button below this video. And of course, you can also head over to my detailed flight training log pages on the Tech Explorations website. In these pages, I document in detail all of my experiences and learnings from each one of my training flights. These logs contain a goldmine of information for any aviation student or anyone interested in aviation. Until next time, I wish you clear skies and safe landings.